Well, good morning. That was kind of lame. Good morning. Now I feel like you're excited to be here. If you have your Bibles, would you please open them up to Ephesians chapter 5. If you were here last week, we went through that passage very theologically and doctrinally, and we're going to re-engage it again today, but we're going to do so much more practically as we continue a series that we've been in for a couple months now entitled Biblical Romance. What we've been doing is looking at the most important relationship that most of us will ever have and looking at it biblically, some godly principles that God wants us to understand. Now, these 2 weeks, last week and this week, we're kind of out of the book of Song of Solomon. We're going to dive back into it the next few weeks. But we wanted to look at some New Testament principles that are really important to understand. But the book of Song of Solomon is kind of like this beautiful snapshot of what this relationship ought to look like from beginning to end. The ideal, meaning we're all going to fall short here and there along the way because it's perfection. Looking at godly principles for this relationship, for what we should be attracted to, godly character, even before we begin to date, and then dating and courtship, and looking at principles for a godly marriage. Now, last week we unpacked Ephesians chapter 5, and we looked at biblical roles that God wants us to play in our marriages, and it was based on gender, based on men and women. And these roles, one is not important than the other, one is not better than the other. They are equal but different. And understanding that and then actually applying it to our life allow us as believers not just to survive marriage, in which a lot of people, that's all they're doing, they're just barely surviving, but when we understand these principles and apply them to our life, they actually allow us to thrive within it. Now, a major thrust of last week was reminding ourselves that we as men and women are different. And it's not just physically, which, by the way, if I have to kind of explain to you or sell you on the fact that we're different physically, I probably can't help you this morning. But beyond that, the reason why we address this is because we're different beyond just physically. The world today is trying to say, besides physically, we're just the same, but that's just simply not true. And it's important that we remind ourselves that we are different because what happens when we get into marriage is sometimes without doing it on purpose, accidentally, we place expectations on our spouses that are almost impossible for the other person to meet, not just because of past experiences, personality, abilities, or effort. They can't meet it simply because they are a man or a woman and they're not made that way. As an example, in case you did not know, men and women are different verbally. And it's not just by effort or desire, scientific, physiological differences. Studies have been done that show us that in the womb, their left hemisphere of their brain, they progress and develop much faster than the male's left hemisphere. In case you were wondering, the left hemisphere is where verbal skills originate. In fact, another study done of 3-year-olds, they recorded them at play. The study found that almost 100% of the girl sounds were understandable verbal expressions. 50% of the boy sounds were unintelligible noises, like tend to what we like to do. So we grow into adulthood, and there's actually a physiological reason why we communicate different. If this is not understood, lovingly addressed, and at times loving leeway given, what can happen in a relationship between a man and a woman is one is giving all the effort and really trying, but not meeting need, and so they feel like it can never be enough, and the other one at the same time might feel neglected and isolated. The reason why it's important to remind ourselves of these differences is if they're not taken into account, it can really become a breakdown of a marriage. Because if we don't take them into account, there can be grave misunderstandings. For instance, women in the room, I promise you there's been a time in your marriage where your man has actually tried to be what you need him to be in a situation, but many guys, by nature, just don't know how to emotionally support you in a way that you want to be supported, and so you may have felt incredibly let down or even hurt, and maybe even expressed that to him, and part of him's like frustrated because it's like, man, I really tried that time. Why should I even try if it doesn't work at all? Now, listen, for us men in the room, that's not an excuse to just simply say, well, I'm not made that way. We need to work at it. We need to get better. But for most men, it's just not natural. We also need to take into account, because we're different, if we don't take this into account, that we're different, we can have unmet expectations. Because we're different, sometimes we're expecting something, honestly, that the other person cannot deliver, at least deliver in a way that we want, just simply because we're different. And as we have these differences, as these expectations are not met, what is human nature is just to assume it's the other person's fault. And then what happens is these differences that first attracted us to each other begin to get on our nerves and divide, and what we do, like Adam and Eve, is blame the other person. It's her fault. It's his fault. If we don't take these differences into account, because we're different, we may never learn how to love our spouse. Love them in such a way that they actually feel loved. See, I've seen it before. It's actually incredibly sad where you have a young couple 5-10 years into a relationship, and each of them is actually really trying to love their spouse, but because they really do speak a bit of a different language, they're not feeling loved. There's a book out there, if you've never read it before, if you've been married a long time, it's still good, but especially if you're single or young into your marriage, I would encourage you to read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Holly and I read it somewhat by accident. 6 months into marriage, everything was going great. We were kind of in new marital bliss, but it was a game changer for us because we really did learn that we speak a different love language. For Holly, she's definitely deep, intimate conversation is how she feels connected in love. I, on the other hand, am kind of a servant by nature. I like to do things around the house. I like to maybe pick up the slack and come alongside her and do things for her. That's how I speak love. But if we never learned that the other one is speaking a bit of a different language, we might have been missing each other even though we were really trying to love one another. Now, as we looked at this last week, we unpacked Ephesians very doctrinally and theologically, which are vital because proper behavior almost always begins with proper doctrinal belief. But we can't just leave it intellectually understood. For it to make a difference in our lives, we must always take the theological and make it practical. And so today I'd like to try to inject into the passage some ways that we can practically live out these principles. Now, these practical principles are based upon a generality. So it's generally speaking, not always and not 100% every man and every woman, but generally speaking, the Ephesians passage was addressing that, again, generally speaking, women feel loved and appreciated when they are cherished, when they're adored. And men, typically, generally speaking, feel loved and appreciated when they are respected and praised. So as the passage begins, last week we looked at Ephesians 5:22, he says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, I don't have the time to address this again this morning. If you were not here last week, don't jump to conclusions. Listen to the message. Download the app. Listen to the message. You might be surprised in what it really means. But how do we actually live this out? Let me give you a few suggestions. So women, to live this out, number one, be your husband's biggest fan. Ephesians 4:29 says this, do not let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. Ladies in the room, if you're married, let me ask you a question. If your friends only knew your husband by what you said about him, how you talk about him, what would they think of him if they never met him? I want you to think about that for a second. Unfortunately, for many of us, men and women, both of us, oftentimes it's easier for us to complain about our spouse instead of complimenting. Even if you're really struggling right now in your marriage, find something that he does well and tell him. All men, it's just a reality. We have a deep need to be admired. He wants to know that you value him, that you respect what he does, that you're proud of him. This has nothing to do with a weak ego. Admiration is a God-given way to give and receive love. Conversely, negative comments about his work, about his performance, about what he's trying to do hurt men deeply. Listen, ladies, if your man only hears from you what he isn't doing well, if he feels as though you do not respect him for what he does around the house, what he does for the kids, what he does for a living, how at least that he's trying to provide for the family, the list goes on, he will not feel loved by you, and then it's very difficult for him to in turn then cherish you, be affectionate with you. And so when you have the opportunity, tell him what he does well, brag about him in public. It goes a long way. Secondly, let your husband have some fun. Now let me explain this. Some of you ladies already know this, but it's become incredibly annoying to you. But for most of us men, not every guy's this way, but most men, we still have a 10-year-old boy inside of us. Now, guys in the room, there's time to grow up. There's time to be a man. We have to be responsible. We have to take care of what we need to take care of. But ladies, you will never know how much weight is on the shoulders of most men to be leaders and providers of their families. And because of this, all men at times need to be able to let off some steam in some ways to you that might seem incredibly silly or ridiculous. That's why guys go camping. It's an excuse to roll around in the dirt. It's why we fix cars, ride motorcycles, get boats, go golfing, play baseball, jump off that cliff, wrestle with you when you don't want to be wrestled with. When you walk by, whoosh, snap you with that towel. I promise your husband will be better for you if you at times give him the freedom to act like a crazy little boy. Now, men in the room, there's an important thing you need to hear in that sentence. What might it be? At times. At times, we need to act this way. Where I golf on a regular basis, there's actually an incredibly sad term they throw around there. They're these ladies that call themselves the golf widows. And it's not because they lost their husband. It's because their husbands, any second they have a chance besides work, they go out and golf. That's not good either. But there would be a clearly communicated freedom between the two of you that at times, with no strings attached, they can go out and have some fun. And whatever they are doing, when they are doing it, there is nothing but full support from you. There's not some unspoken understanding that he's going to have to pay for it later. Because then he's not even going to enjoy the time, and then it's just kind of a waste of time for everybody. And let me just kind of add a caveat to it. If he invites you to come along, that every once in a while, even though it might not be something that you enjoy, that you would do it. Because again, this might sound weird to you, many guys' love language is not actually talking. It's actually doing something with you that they enjoy. Men feel in love in companionship. Thirdly, provide a peaceful home. Proverbs 17:1 says, better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a full house of feasting with strife. Translation, it's better to be poor and have a peaceful home than to be rich and fighting all the time. For many men, they work very hard all day, and if coming home is just more stressful than work, over time, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to find reasons to stay at work. Would you say that your home is stress-reducing or stress-producing? Now, I know it's difficult to create a peaceful, stress-free, loving environment in this day and age, especially when both of you are working, 2 career families. Most of us have, our kids, an incredible amount of activities. And listen, I'm not just saying it to the women in the room. I'm speaking to men. It's a team effort, but for ladies in the room, I want you to be mindful of it because by and large, women tend to be managers of the home. What can you do to possibly reduce stress at home, not add to it? Might be something that you do talk about later today or talk about at a date night, that you brainstorm some ways that both of you can produce more peace in the house. And listen to me, for some of you, this might be hard to hear. It might mean that your kids aren't involved in every activity under the sun. Now, I've seen it. I've seen so many families get so involved, especially in this travel sports these days. And really, in the end, they're hardly even going to church anymore, and basically, they've turned sport into a lowercase g God, as if their kid's going pro. I hate to break it to you. Your kid's not going pro. And what you're doing to the entire family is you're teaching them priorities. You're teaching them what is most important. Now, for us men, he starts to speak to us in verse 25. And he says, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I want you to think about that for a second. What a huge call. What are some practical things that you can do to actually live this out? Number 1, be the spiritual leader of your house. Be the spiritual leader of your family. Now, you may not know what that really looks like, so I would encourage you to be discipled, go to men's group, grow in your faith. Ephesians says, present her to Christ holy and blameless. Now, there's a variety of ways I believe you can do this. Holly and I, quite a few times, we've tried to do a Bible study together, and for whatever reason, that just doesn't work for us. Some of you guys are like, whew, that's good to hear. Now, I'm not saying that it can't work. It can actually be incredibly beneficial. My point is, I believe spiritual leadership can take many forms. Let me give you some suggestions. 1, put her in situations where she can grow, where she can spiritually grow. That might mean do a Bible study together, but for me, what I do is support her spiritual growth. For instance, for us, it's not uncommon at all for me to stay home and hang out with the kids or take responsibility or get them to where they need to be so Holly can engage in her spirituality. Such things as she might just go out to Starbucks and just spend some time with God. She might take a class, get to a Bible study, meet with some girls, have an opportunity to serve God in a variety of ways. Whatever she needs for her spiritual growth, she knows she has my full support. Secondly, in spiritual leadership, set a godly example. I'll never forget this. Years ago when I was 26, 27, youth pastor of a high school group, and it was going really well. When I took over, it was about 60 kids. At this time, it had grown to like 220 kids showing up on a weekly basis. Friday nights, we're getting like 500 kids. Kids were accepting Christ on a regular basis. We had some 30 small groups all over the city. It was really growing. It was going really well. And I'll never forget this one dad. He wanted to meet with me, and he basically spent a half an hour telling me how terrible the youth group is for all these reasons because his kids didn't want to come. Now, while he was talking about it, what I really wanted to say, the reason why your kids don't want to come more than anything is because they're all about sports and partying on the weekends and girls. But I didn't say that. I just listened. But after a little while, I finally said, do you think there might be another reason why they might not come? And he said, well, what might that be? I said, well, might it be because you never go to church? Now, he didn't like that very much and actually got pretty upset with me. But I told him, I said, hey, let me just love on you a little bit. You haven't been in church in over a year. So how can you expect your kids to come to church and want to come to church when you're staying home watching football every Sunday? Listen, you just need to hear this, men. By and large, the kids are going to want to do what dad is doing. They're going to follow you, whatever that might be. Set a godly example. And part of that is take responsibility for your own spiritual growth. Are you reading the Word? Are you doing Bible studies? Are you growing in your faith? Are you praying? You cannot lead your families where you are not going. And then share your journey. I promise to spark conversation. Say something like, hey, man, this is what I've been reading. This is the Bible study I'm in. This is how it's impacting me. Now, some of you ladies, you might pass out when he does this, but you'll come back too, and then they're all in. Most of them are longing to have this kind of conversation. And honestly, it's one of my weaknesses. So a lot of people think because I preach, I'm this great communicator. Honestly, standing up in front of a crowd is easy for me. Sit in front of one other person and opening up my heart is very, very difficult. And it's not about machoism. It's not about that. I just don't really know how to do it, to be honest with you. I'm not very good at it. In fact, my worst spiritual discipline, without a doubt, is prayer. And it's not because I don't want to do it or don't believe in it. It's because that's when I have to actually open up and be vulnerable before God. But I know my wife needs this. It's when she feels connected. Ask them, what are you learning? What are you reading? Where are you spiritually? Let your kids see you open up the Bible and read it. Do a Bible study in front of them. Pray. Holly and I, she actually the one that put it up there, but she has this list that says how to pray for kids. It's got a list of ways to pray for our kids. It's sorry to offend you, but it's on our bathroom door. So we see it all the time. And when we're looking at it, I pray regularly. I read this years ago, and I don't remember what book I read it in, but it said, I want you to write down how you want your son to look spiritually when he's 25 years old. So I spent some time writing all these things. And then I didn't see it, but right underneath it asked a simple question, are you praying for this? Man, that hit me really hard. Secondly, men, assign top priority to your marriage. Again, last week's passage, I can't unpack it right now. It tells women to submit to their husbands, to the Lord. It can be hard for some to hear if you don't understand what that really means. But I don't know if I've ever met a woman who has a problem coming underneath the biblical spiritual leadership of a man who will love her as Christ loved the church. The question I have for every husband in this room is this. Where do you think your wife would say she falls on your priority list? Does she have to compete with your friends? Does she have to compete with your hobby? Does she have to compete with work? Does she have to fight, the TV for your attention? Does she feel left out of your day? Does she feel left out of your dreams? I know there's been days where Holly has felt that way. You know why I know that? Because she told me. I can't ignore that. But some of you don't know that's how your wife is feeling. Ask her. Be a man and say, man, where do you fall? Where do you think you fall on my priority list? Think about it this way. When you first started dating, where do you think your wife would have said she falls on your priority list? Probably number one, or else you wouldn't have been dating much longer. It's really interesting how we as men, we often, in the dating context, we're relationship geniuses, and then we get married and we become relationship oafs. Put her at the top again, and you do this by doing what you did at first. Thirdly, dare to show affection, specifically verbally. Proverbs 16:24 says, pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Now, some women, you look at us guys and how we try to show affection to one another, and you think, man, they don't know how to do it, When we give hugs, it's almost always the first, we whoosh the hand, and then we kind of go around. If we give a full hug, you got to have the pat. That's the unwritten rule. There's never an embrace between you guys. That never happens. I have a huge group of friends that when I walk into the golf, pro shop or the club or whatever, hey, it's little Jesse. And a lot of people are like, man, they're ripping on. It's a total term of affection. It means the world to me. They see, guys see each other, hey, ugly, hey, baldy. It's like, man, I love that guy. He's the best. So you might not think he's very good at it, but it's not completely true. Men in the room, do you remember when you were engaged or when you were first married? Most of you could tell your wife 100 times a day in 100 different ways that you loved her. Our wives need us to show them that we love them, but they also need to hear it. When she comes out and she looks hot, tell her. Compliment her on something she's done around the house. Here's a big one. Express appreciation for the little things she does all the time that usually go unnoticed and unappreciated. We just had Valentine's Day, and a lot of us guys in the room, you went out and bought a card and got some flowers or whatever, and you give it to them. But the problem with that is you kind of had to. What if you did it on a random day in July? Maybe even mark it now, put it in your calendar, and you just go out and buy a card and spend some time saying, you know what? These are the things that I'm really thankful for you in my life. I know I don't say it enough, but I love you and I'm thankful for you. I promise you that will change your relationship. And beyond words, and I'm not talking about sex, but be physically affectionate. I'm not saying PDA, don't make out in the mall. That's not good for anybody. But yeah, you're walking down, you're shopping, reach for a hand. When you go to a movie, I know it's hard for you, but pull up that divider and cuddle a little bit. Maybe give her a 5-minute massage when she's watching TV. Being affectionately in love doesn't have to go away. Number 4, men, listen to understand without giving unwanted advice. Dun, dun, dun. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. When I do marital counseling, which I only do maybe a time or two because I'm not a professional counselor. It's usually when there's kind of minor irritations. But without a doubt, it's almost the same thing over and over and over again. She'll say something like, he just never listens to me. He doesn't understand where I'm coming from. And a lot of times he's sitting there looking at me like, what? I listen all the time. She tells these stories and stories and stories and stories. And I can repeat back to her verbatim what she said. I'm listening. Typically what's happening is women tend to share how they're feeling about a particular situation or problem, they don't want your advice. They don't want you to solve it. She could probably solve it herself. She's looking for her friend, her best friend in life, to understand what she's going through, what she's feeling. If she wants your advice, she'll ask for it. She might ignore it, but she'll ask for it. 5th, by and large, women desperately want to feel secure. How? What kind of security should we bring? One is financial security. Now listen, she doesn't need to be rich. She doesn't need you to be rich. She needs you to be responsible. She needs to know that you're working hard, doing what you can to provide. And let me take a sidestep. This isn't just in life. If you're 20-some-odd-year-old and to 50-year-old and you're married, I have a really important question for you, especially if you have kids. Do you have life insurance? Now listen, I'm not an insurance salesman. I get no commission whatsoever. But I cannot tell you how many times I've come across a family, a young family, who's lost their husband at 30, 35 years old. And he's leaving a wife, 2, 3 kids at home. And she's broken, not only because she lost her husband and her father, but there's this undercurrent of fear and anxiety because he's left her with a house, cars, bills, 3 kids, and no way to take care of it. I'm not selling you on anything, but they say for a 35-year-old, somewhat healthy guy, it's like $400 a year for about $1 million policy. Which $1 million sounds like, oh my gosh, that's so much money. when you're paying off a house and cars and getting kids to where they need to get to, and then you got college and you got all this stuff coming up, take care of your family, not only in life, but in your possible death. Also give her physical security. And I'm not talking about you would fight for her. I'm saying that she knows you're a one-woman man. She knows that when you're off with your buddies, you're not hitting on other women, that she's still beautiful to you, she's still unique to you. And it's hard for me to talk about this because I don't have time to really unpack it, but we have a major epidemic taking place in our culture today, and it's called pornography. And I know many, many men are struggling with it on one level or another in this room. And I've sat down with a couple before, and I've had guys actually say something like, well, I don't understand why it's such a big deal. I still love her. She's still pretty. You have to understand when you're into that stuff, she feels overlooked. She feels like she can't compete. She feels inadequate. She feels like she can't satisfy. A woman never feels so unattractive and unloved when you're into that stuff. Give her emotional security. She needs to know that she has you completely emotionally, meaning you're not flirting with some old girlfriend on Facebook. You might say, yeah, there's nothing there. You'll never have an affair. There's nothing physical. But she needs to know that you are her one person. You're faithful to her and your emotions as well. Let me end with just a few statements that are true for all of us. Number one, it's your job to love your spouse. It's God's job to change them. Prayerfully allow God to change your spouse. Secondly, every person is unique. Be an expert on how to love your spouse. Have you ever even asked? I wonder. Have you ever just sat down and some of you are like, don't do this to me right now. You're going to make me have to ask later. Have you ever just sat down and say, how do you need me to love you? What makes you feel loved by me? Is it words? Is it service? Is it security? What do you need from me, and vice versa? Be an expert on your spouse. Thirdly, successful marriages depend on you being the right person. What I mean by this is control what you can control. Control your decisions, your actions, your responsibilities, your spirituality. Too many times I see in a relationship one of them trying to parent the other person. You can't be their parent. It destroys a relationship. Control what you can control. And then lastly, and this is a huge one, especially honestly if you're single, looking to get married. The only person who can truly meet your deepest needs is Jesus Christ. If you think you're going to get married and all of a sudden you're going to be able to say, you complete me, it's not really true. And you're putting an expectation on that person that nobody can meet. In fact, I read once, you know you're ready to get married when you can say, I am completely and totally fulfilled in my relationship with Jesus Christ and I don't need anything more. That's when you're ready for marriage. Because then you step into it and you're ready to be who God's called you to be. Amen? Let me pray. God, thank you so much for who you are and what you're doing in and amongst us. Again, anytime we talk about marriage, God, I know I'm doing some toiling, and there's some people that are really hurting in their relationship right now. So I just want to pray for them. I want to out loud say to everybody as I pray that it's never too late. That God is a God of miracles. He wants to redeem your relationship. And I would just pray, Lord, that wherever they are, from a minor irritation to it's about to blow up, that they would do something. They wouldn't ignore it. Because the longer, Lord, we ignore these issues, the bigger they get and the harder it is to fix, the harder it is to deal with. Lord, allow us to be people of faith, that we represent you well as Christians. And a big part of that, God, is in our relationships, in our marriages. I pray for all those single in the room, Lord, that you continue to prepare them to be the man or woman of God that you called them to be, so they'd be ready for this huge call in their life. I pray this in Jesus' name. And God's people said, hey, God bless you. Hope to see you next Sunday. I want to remind you we have prayer warriors that come up after the services. It doesn't have to be anything to do with the message, and they would love to pray with you if you're struggling with something. God bless you. See you next week.